Welcome back to The Quest for the Cures continues. If you watched last night's episode, and I hope you did, you learned about some natural, non-toxic cancer therapies that are being used in clinics across the United States to effectively treat cancer. Now tonight, we're going to find out from actual physicians that have been diagnosed with cancer themselves what they did to treat their cancer. Now, that was something that I wanted to know when my mom and dad were diagnosed. I remember vividly both of them being in the operating room and asking the surgeons, what should we do? What would you do if you were diagnosed with cancer? We wanted that expert opinion in order to make our decision. Now, if you remember the episode a few episodes ago, Dr. Tony Jimenez from the Hope for Cancer Clinic down in Tijuana, he mentioned the fact that upwards of 80% of oncologists, when they were surveyed, said that they or their family would not use chemotherapy if they were diagnosed with cancer. Now, that blew me away. The fact that the professionals that are prescribing these treatments would not use them themselves. That's a pretty telling statistic to me. So tonight we're going to learn about what these physicians actually did to treat their cancer in a natural way. And these physicians are still alive to give us their story, so we know that the treatments must have been pretty successful because they're here to tell them to us. This is going to be an encouraging show to you. I know it was to me. We're going to learn from actual cancer patients that cured their cancer naturally, and they happen to be doctors. Enjoy the show, and we'll see you at the end. You are sitting here today, you look like a picture of health, but that wasn't the case 4 or 5 years ago.
No, not at all.
Tell us your personal story.
It's been almost 5.5, 6 years ago, I started having severe headaches. And obviously, what I do, I'm taking care of people every day with headaches. So I'm thinking, okay, it's probably just coming from my spine and my nerves. And I was getting adjusted. Headaches were doing phenomenal, but it kept coming back. I then finally started getting weak. I was losing weight. I did some blood work. In the blood, white blood cells. I was anemic. Things were going on. At that point, we knew something was going on. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease at that time, so we started taking care of the Lyme. I ran another test, still not feeling good, but ran another Lyme test. Lyme was cleared. They cleared out the Lyme. And so at that point, I knew that there was time for an MRI. So I had one of my doctors, who's a friend of mine whose wife is a nurse, said it's time to get an MRI. And I knew it. I knew I didn't want an MRI. I got an MRI about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I say that the timing for a reason. About 3:30 in the afternoon, I had my MRI. They told me they'd let me know the next day the results. I went home and I slept pretty much 18 hours a day, 19 hours a day. I could barely stand up. I was laying on the couch, and at that time, I woke up to my wife and my oldest son on top of me crying, and it literally was like someone died, and I knew something was wrong at that time. And my wife is crying, and she said they already called for an MRI, and I'm thinking I must have slept till, I'm thinking it's the next day already. It was an hour and a half, 2 hours later. The radiologist held my X-ray up to the light, or my MRI up to the light, looked at it, and immediately saw 2 huge tumors on my brainstem, and I had 2 small ones by the eyes. He said I needed to get to Northwestern Hospital. Meaning they didn't even want me to go through the night. They thought I literally wouldn't wake up in the morning. It was just that severe.
Wow.
So I rushed to Northwestern immediately. It was about 5:30. Got to Northwestern around 6:30. When I got there, they assumed that this was benign. They did no other test yet. But they assumed this is going to be benign. We're going to go up there. You're young. You're healthy. It's gonna, we're not going to have any issues with the surgery. So, but I had so much cerebral spinal fluid in the brain because the tumors were putting so much pressure on the spinal cord. Like literally, the spinal fluid couldn't get down my spinal cord. So all the spinal fluid would stay up here. So that's what would create my headache. So if I would lay down for a while and relax, the spinal fluid would be able to settle back down. And so they came in. I walked into the room. My mother had driven about 2 hours quickly to be there. I walked into the room. My mother and my wife were in there. And the doctor looked at my wife and my mother, and they said, "You don't want to see this." At that time, they had to take a drill and drill down the top of my head here to put a tube down there to start draining the fluid. There was so much fluid in my brain.
And you still got a scar there.
Yeah, I got a scar here, and I have a scar here. But yeah, so they went down this way to take the fluid out of my brain. Literally, they don't use medication when they put a hole in your head. So they literally, no medication at all. They have to drill a hole down through my head to put a tube into there. And it literally, and people say, what did it feel like or sound like? It sounded like somebody was going through tile or porcelain, like they're drilling through the head and then pulling back up. It's like a little
Wow.
saw, it looks like. So they put the tube in there, and I'll tell you, at that point, you're like, thank God for modern medicine.
Yeah.
Headaches went away immediately. They got the fluid out of there, and that's what medicine's there for. Medicine's crisis care. I was in a crisis, but there was no way they were going to get me back to health again, but it was definitely there for crisis. They got the fluid out of there. I could function. The next day, the neurosurgeon came in and said, this here, it's going to be easy. We're going to go through about a week of preparation to get you ready, making sure you can handle the surgery. They're going to do a brain surgery, so they're going to have to go right up inside of there, and they're just going to go in and cut out the tumors. And so they didn't do any other blood work. They didn't test anything else, but basic stuff for the surgery. About a week later, it was a Tuesday morning, I went in for surgery. They said it'd be about 8 to 12 hour surgery, and Dr. Ben Lerner, who wrote the book with me, my wife, we had tons of the Maximized Living doctors and family and friends all in the room waiting for me to come out of surgery. And instead of being 8 or 12 hour surgery, it was pretty quick. They literally, it was over. And and I didn't know this. They went into the room to tell my wife. They said, we have bad news. It wasn't benign tumors. It was cancerous. And when I went to cut on the first one, when you cut on cancer, or you mess with it at all, it swells. And the cancer began to swell, and it was started to bleed. And obviously, what does the blood carry? More cancer. So they said that the chances are that I may not wake up in the morning because the swelling was so big in the brain now, and the cancer was spreading worse. And so I woke up the next morning, and I have a tube down my throat because I couldn't breathe. Tubes coming out of my stomach, tubes coming out of my head, and I'm thinking the tumors are gone. I have no clue what's going on. No one's telling me anything. And finally, they told me that it wasn't benign, that this was cancer. And I couldn't speak at all to anyone else. And then they said, we need to do more testing. It's worse than that. So what could be worse than cancer already in your brain and spreading? They said it's worse than that. It's secondary. It's coming from somewhere in the body. So then they went in, did CAT scans and PET scans, and did everything they could for the next 3 or 4 days. They could not find any cancer anywhere else. They couldn't figure out. So finally they had to do a bone marrow test. They went in, they drill your bone marrow, they take out some bone marrow, they test it. About 37 to 40% of my blood was making cancer. And so I was diagnosed at that time with a multiple myeloma, which is the myelocytes that were reacting. So I had all this myeloma and these myelocytes. I had bone marrow cancer, and it was because it was made in the blood, it spread. What was interesting is because of the way I was living, it never went to any other organ. Almost every single myeloma patient, it goes to their spine, their bones crack, and it's a horrible death, where mine only went up to my brain. So whatever I was doing, they said how I was living at least kept it out of the rest of my body, because they figured out it should have been all through my bones. It should have been everywhere else. At that time, they had 2 oncologists. They walked into the room with me to give me the bad news, and they said, the bad news is it's incurable. It's already in your brain. The only thing we could do is bone marrow transplant, high dose chemo, and some radiation, and that would only buy you time.
So incurable, and not really any kind of a positive long-term prognosis.
No, and they were absolutely correct. In their model, they're absolutely correct.
Making you comfortable.
Yes, they would have made me comfortable. They said, no matter what, get the things in order, and they understood that there were the chances of me making it. Now, here's what most other people don't know is I walked in the hospital at 155 pounds. At the time of diagnosis, I was 118 pounds in a wheelchair. So through all the surgeries, laying in the hospital bed, going through everything I had to go through, I couldn't function. I couldn't eat because I had the tube, going down my throat. So what do you think they were feeding me the whole time? Sugar. Luckily we worked with a nutritionist, and as soon as we found out what was going on, is we got off the sugar, got to bring our own stuff in, and started working on all that stuff. But in that moment they walked in, and most people say, what was going through your mind when they tell you it's incurable? There's nothing they can do. You have months to live. At the time it was weeks with chemo and radiation. They said it may give me a few months. I literally said to myself, if I cut myself right now in this room, if I cut my arm, what would happen in the next 3 or 4 days? It would heal. So if my brain can heal this cut, my brain can heal this cancer. My heart's working, my stomach's working, my lungs are working, the other trillions of processes are working in my body. So my brain doesn't have, there's nothing wrong with my brain, there's nothing wrong with healing, it's just not healing the cancer. So something had to cause this. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't genetic, it wasn't bad luck. They kept saying, oh, it's just genetic and it refers. No, the body's too smart to go into something that's so negative, right? That it had to be positive. That I was laying there, and as hard as it was, I had to see that what's going on in my body was the right thing at the right time. Every symptom is the body doing the right thing at the right time. If right now, if I put handcuffs on you and locked you up and came at you with a knife, what happens to your blood pressure? Your blood pressure rises. What happens to your cortisol during stress? Your cortisol rises. What happens to your gut? You start taking away all the nutrition out of your body. You can't even absorb nutrition when you're in a fight or flight syndrome. So all of a sudden, you're nutritionally deficient, your immune system is shot, your blood pressure is rising, now your cholesterol is being affected. Is that a symptom? Is that your genetics, or is your body adapting? Is that symptom of your body adapting to the stress it's put under? It's adapting. Cancer is the same thing. I knew at that moment, luckily I knew what I was supposed to know, which is the most important thing, is I knew my body was only adapting to the environment I had it in, that I had to go in and change the environment.
So what did you do? What were your treatments?
So that moment, that was a Thursday morning, I was let out. I literally got on a plane at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and flew to Reno, Nevada to see Dr. James Forsythe. He's one of the premier oncologists in the world. But I went there. I literally started treatments there on Friday. Literally within days. I knew that I wasn't waiting on this. And then at that point, what he was using there is IV vitamin C, poly-MVA. He had his own Forsythe immune therapies. I was doing all different stuff. I was doing all the diet stuff, which I knew how to do, working on all the supplementation, all the exercise work. I was doing all that. They were killing it. And just like I teach now, the number one thing that has to be done when someone has cancer is you have to get to the cause. The second step is, now kill it. But if you don't get to the cause and stop creating it and stop making it, it doesn't matter if I kill it or not. I could have killed all this cancer. It would have bought me some time, thank God, like chemo and radiation may do. But if I don't stop making it, if I don't get to the cause, it's going to come back anyway. So when I was in Reno with Dr. Forsythe, I was there so he could help kill it because it was spreading. It was in my brain. I could barely function. So he was helping kill the cancer. I was working on stopping making it, changing my lifestyle, changing the environment. I was there about 3 weeks. I left there, came home, began all the protocols at home. I had ozone machine, which rectal ozone, PEMF, positron electronic magnification frequencies. I was doing infrared saunas. I was doing high dose proteolytic therapies, poly-MVAs. I was doing probably 100 to 120 supplements a day throughout. And then my blood work was being read at that time by Dr. Helu in Spain, who's another top cancer doctor there. And he would read my blood, and then I went out there about 4 months later. I spent 2 weeks there, amazing, following him, watching him do what he does. And now I send my blood work there every 3 to 6 months to him. I do my blood works here. And now it's obviously it's going on almost 4 years now that I'm feeling good, doing better than ever. Blood works look clear. Dr. Helu even said to me, stop sending your blood to me, send it next year. But I still send it all the time.
Good.
Because for me, medicine's there to, thank God, I could run every medical test on you, every cancer test on you. I could do every medical test there is. When would it find cancer? After you have it, right? Thank God we have those tests, but I don't want to wait for a test. Medicine's early detection of a disease that's already existing. It's not healthcare, it's not preventative care. The disease is already there. And thank God we have those things, but those things aren't going to get me back to health again.
Right. So really what you're stressing, and I'm seeing this as a common thread among a lot of the interviewees for this mini-series, is that prevention is the key, and also changing the environment of the body that makes it inhospitable to cancer, because cancer doesn't live in certain environments. It doesn't do well in certain environments. So the focus is really prevention and to change that internal terrain so that cancer doesn't feel like it's at home.
Oh, absolutely. Again, we look at the normal healthy cell uses oxygen as its respiration. We know a cancer cell hates oxygen. So we know that we need to get more oxygen into the body, and that's what ozone is doing. You know, I do a lot of vitamin C. Most people don't realize that vitamin C is helping bring more oxygen into the body. I do IV hydrogen peroxide, and I still do these things. I do IV H2O2, and so I'm doing things that are also bringing in lots of oxygen in my body, into my cells, giving it the environment that this cancer can't live. I do my high intensity, short duration workouts, you know, 6 days a week still. So I do all my protocols still to this day to make sure I'm creating an environment where that cancer can never come back. Changing your environment changes the possibility of getting cancer.
So let me ask you this, Dr. J. If you were diagnosed with colon cancer, let's say, what would you do?
Well, I will tell you, I mean, this does hit home. I didn't talk about this in the beginning, but early on in my practice, I was 28 years old, and all of a sudden I had this big red spot on my nose right here. And the cancer actually that my grandfather had was a melanoma, a metastatic melanoma, so a skin cancer. And so I knew I was susceptible to something along those lines. I grew up surfing on the beach, so I've had a lot of intense sun exposure, probably been burnt way more than I would naturally recommend, just really because I didn't know any better. And so I knew I was susceptible, and you know, at that period of time in my life, I was living, number one, with a lot of fear. I had just opened a business, so I was in a tremendous amount of debt. I had a lot of people counting on me. There was lots of, you know, when you run a business, there's confrontation, there's all different types of issues. And you know, my nutrition wasn't excellent. It was great, I would say. It was a lot better than most people, but it wasn't excellent. There was a lot of things in my life that were issues. And so I looked at myself in the mirror, and I could see exactly what was developing. And I knew enough to know that that was not normal. And certainly I could have gone to a dermatologist or somebody for a more advanced diagnosis of it, but I really didn't need that. To me, it was a wake-up call. And I think really for all of us, we've got to have eyes to see and ears to hear in our own life, because ultimately, you know, if we're living in a way that's just not beneficial to us and the people around us, there's going to be wake-up calls. And I just took inventory of where I was at in my life, and I realized that fear was my dominating thought, fear of failure, fear of letting people down, and I knew I needed to work on myself mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I looked at my nutrition. I realized, you know what, there was probably way too many carbohydrates in there than there should be, okay? And so I took out the carbohydrates. I went ketogenic. I was overtraining. I was actually exercising too much, so I really focused on rest. Really resting my body well, because I was in a state of adrenal fatigue. And so I really needed to rest effectively. And I just took inventory of all the different areas of my life, sort of doing more detox, really trying to detoxify my liver, utilizing some different supplements, some different advanced strategies. You know, in a matter of 2 months, it completely went away. And so to me, it was just, you know, it was really just a message that, hey, my body can heal itself. I just need to line up with the right principles. And certainly I wouldn't say I was in an advanced state of cancer, but I was looking at something that, you know, had the potential to kill me. And, you know, by just heeding that warning, taking inventory of my life, really getting it under check, you know, I was able to heal myself naturally. And so I would take the same approach.
Question for you.
Okay.
If you were diagnosed with cervical cancer,
Okay.
what would you do? Would you give me your steps
Right.
to treat cervical cancer?
Well, I'd go through the organ cleanses. I do them twice a year, minimum twice a year. You can do them as often as every 3 months if you want.
Okay.
Most people are able to get them in twice a year. They pick a
What do
season, spring or fall.
What do you mean organ cleanses?
Organ cleanses, you want to do the 5 major ones, and this is to make sure you have toxin removal, free flow of toxins coming out of the body. So when you have too many toxins, it compromises the system. It becomes a weak in the chain, a link in the chain, and you can develop a problem. So you do your bowel cleansing. You do it in this order because you want to open the last stage of toxin removal first. So normally the blood would be filtering toxins to the liver, and then the liver will neutralize those impurities with an enzyme called P450. And then the residues go to the gallbladder, and the gallbladder will dump those through the bowel, through the duodenum and the urinary tract to leave the body. So you want to open the bowel and the urinary tract first. So those are the colon cleanse and the urinary tract cleanse you want to do. Then you can move to the liver and gallbladder and then blood system. So once you've got the system purified, make sure you don't put anything in there that would compromise, recongest the system is usually how I put it. So, you know, do your green vegetables. You may want to do some juice therapy, do some spirulina and chlorella protein in your juicing, and just get some organic whole foods into the system and get away from the processed foods, no processed foods. Now, there's even some herbal boluses that we instruct folks that they can use to you know, get to the area a little quickly. They can do castor oil packs to draw more cancer out through the skin. You can do a combination of things, not just one thing when it comes to cancer. You can kind of pound it from different areas and just, you know, get it to leave the body faster.
Well, that is consistent with your cleanse and nourish.
It is.
You're going to cleanse.
It's real basic, but it's an old therapy. I mean, it's hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old, and it seems to be very basic, and it's doable. You know, people can do it, and it's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars like they would for medical treatment in a hospital.
Right. So let me ask you this, Mike. What would you do if you were diagnosed today with prostate cancer? What would be your protocol that you would, and I'm not asking you to recommend this to anybody.
Right.
Okay, we don't do that.
Yeah.
But what would you do personally if you
Personally?
said your doctor said you got prostate cancer?
Well, first thing I would do is try to understand why, where did this prostate cancer come from? In a guy like myself who eats very healthy foods and superfoods and leads an anti-cancer lifestyle, this news would be a shock, and the most likely culprit would be an environmental cause, probably a hormone disruption chemical. So I would immediately start to think maybe I'm being exposed to BPA, which is probably true. I'm sure I have some level of BPA in my blood.
Right.
It's almost impossible to get rid of.
And real quickly, what is BPA?
Oh, bisphenol A, hormone
Which
mimicker.
is a hormone mimicker that's
It's a
in
plasticizer.
blood. Okay.
And it's in
blood.
receipts. See, this is the thing. When I take a receipt from a place of purchase, I'm touching that receipt, and I'm getting BPA from that receipt. I haven't yet made
Because
the leap.
it stops the ink from dissolving
coating.
after time, right?
Yeah.
It stops. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So we'd figure BPA. So then, in that case, you'd want to get hormone-sensitive superfoods, or superfoods that interact with that metabolic pathway, which would be, for example, I3C, indole 3-carbinol, which is one of the medicinal phytonutrient constituents of broccoli.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cruciferous vegetables. So I would immediately start doing that. If it were prostate cancer, I would also really up my dosage of resveratrol
Okay.
and zinc. Both of those things are very, very useful for prostate cancer prevention. You can get zinc in pumpkin seeds. So I would probably increase my intake of pumpkin seeds.
Okay.
There are also pumpkin seed proteins out there that maintain many of the phytonutrients of the pumpkin seed. So I would start to become a pumpkin seed protein smoothie guy
Okay.
with a lot of resveratrol. I would also eat red grapes with their seeds, and I would specifically chew on the seeds to release the many beneficial nutrients that the seeds contain.
I'm glad you mentioned that because
Yeah.
one of the frequent questions that I get from people is, if there's all this nutrition in the seeds, should I chew them?
You should chew them.
Absolutely. Otherwise, they just pass right
Of course, of course. One of the things that I learned being a lab scientist is that human digestion is very, very weak. When I built the gastric acid digestion simulator, at first I thought I'd made a mistake because most of the foods that I ran through the simulator were not well
they didn't get
digested.
digested.
It turns out that chewing is the single most important step in the digestion process.
Yes.
We actually now have to pre-chew with a chewing device before we put foods into the gastric acid simulation. It's a gastric acid, it's a synthetic gastric acid, I should say. It's not a computer simulation.
Right.
It's a physical process.
Yeah, sure.
But if you just take, for example, beef jerky, and you put it into gastric acid that's the same pH as human
It'll pass right
digestion
through.
acid, it barely gets digested at all.
Yeah, chewing, I'm glad you mentioned that because chewing is so important.
Yeah.
Not only does it help you to digest the food, but it also releases enzymes.
Yes.
You know, as you chew the food in your mouth, it releases enzymes that help you to digest the foods as well.
You're right. And as a detox technique, chewing the foods also increases the surface area of the insoluble fibers. Many of the fibers in a chunk of food are locked inside the food. And if you want those fibers to be beneficial to you, to bind with all the things we've been talking
Yeah,
about,
the toxins,
mercury,
the heavy
lead,
metals,
whatever, arsenic. You need those fibers to be available, physically available to the digestion liquids.
Right.
Chewing is what allows that to happen. The other big aha in all of this is that it gets us back to the amazing power of a common sense whole food diet.
Yeah.
That when you look at, hey, there might be toxins in some of these foods, but if you actually eat whole foods, there are natural things in there that will absorb the toxins without you even knowing about it.
Yeah.
So as I have done this research, what it has really done is given me more and more respect for Mother Nature, and more amazement at how nature achieves balance and protects your body from toxins in the environment through things that you never were even aware of.
So Dr. Quillen, last question for this interview. If you were personally diagnosed with stomach cancer, colon cancer, what would you do?
Good question. First of all, I would hope that my lifestyle gives me that 90% protection, that we can cut your risk by 90% of getting cancer if you do things right. However, there's still that 10%. And what I would do is I work with the brightest medical staff that I could. I'd look for good diagnostics. There's reasons for these diagnostic equipment. You know, MRIs, CAT scans, PET scans, find out how invasive is the tumor. Find out how much time do we have. There are some people who you better get in there and do something aggressive right now, or you could be dead within hours or days. I would hope that I would have some time to look at non-toxic therapies. Very important for me is don't burn bridges. Too often the medical therapies that are used for cancer patients, surgery to take out 20 lymph nodes in breast cancer. Now the patient's going to have lymphedema, swollen lymph in their arm for the rest of their life, pain. Maybe they need narcotics. They've burned a bridge. Was it necessary? Radiation therapy, you know, you can damage the esophagus to the point of where it's like parchment paper from radiation. Was it necessary? Using targeted therapy. So for instance, instead of a whole body radiation, I might think about using IMRT, or intensity modulated radiation therapy, which is more of a rifle than a hand grenade. But the first thing I would do is I'd say, I'd like to have some information about why I got it. What's the underlying cause here? And there are many very bright physicians in this country who look at etiology, toxic burden, stress, malnutrition. Take blood samples and look at what's the level of everything from vitamins and minerals to what's the pH of your body. Look at saliva samples, fecal samples, looking for parasites. So an aggressive look at etiology, what caused this? And a second aggressive look at what's the stage, how invasive and aggressive is it? And from that make some decisions that hopefully would lean towards relatively non-toxic therapies. For instance, intravenous vitamin C helps many, hurts none. Infrared therapy, far infrared, cooking the cancer, fever therapy, helps some, hurts none. So I always look at a risk to benefit to cost ratio, saying, I don't want to do any damage. That's primera non nocere is what Hippocrates said. And the oath that all physicians give is first do no harm. I would look at IV vitamin C, hyperthermia. I would look at, there are some relatively non-toxic therapies to modulate blood glucose. Lower blood glucose to try and starve the tumor. There are some herbs that are extremely powerful. I mentioned everything from this modified citrus pectin to there's an extract that is a fermented version of wheat germ. Well, not to mention too many names, but there is a pharmacy. There is a list of therapies that are effective, clinically proven, relatively non-toxic, and relatively inexpensive. You think about treating a cancer patient, 1 year is going to cost about $250,000 average. There are cheaper, more effective, more humane and scientific ways of doing cancer treatment.
Doctor comes to you and says, Robert Scott Bell, your last blood work shows that you have lung cancer. What do you do?
Well, I'm going to nebulize silver. Silver has shown to have profound oncolytic properties. This is something we can do. We talk about a pH issue sometimes. You know, I don't know if you've covered the use of baking soda in this way. You can actually do a lavage within the lungs to nebulize that into certain tissue of the lungs. It's a little more difficult to do. But the silver alone is profound because the cancer cells don't have an antioxidant defense mechanism. And the silver brings with it as much as 10 times its atomic weight in with every particle of silver at a micro level. We're talking a nanoscale level. And you can overwhelm and devastate cancer cells in that area within the alveoli if you can inhale that deeply into your lungs. So
and that's what nebulize means.
Yeah, to take a liquid into a vaporous state for safe inhalation. And so this is one of the most profound, most radical and direct ways you can neutralize cancer within the lungs, and most people don't know about it.
Any other steps that you might take at that point?
Well, connective tissue integrity, we come back to silica, we come back to metabolic sufficiency, meaning selenium and chromium in the same ways we talk about it. I would do homeopathic medicines that directly impact on lung tissue, and even sarcodes, homeopathic dilutions of cancerous tissue, cancerous cells from the lungs themselves. And that also mobilizes the immune system to attack and hold in check those cancer cells. So there's a number of factors, number of things that you can do in that case.
Casey, last question. If you were diagnosed with prostate cancer, what would you do?
Well, that's a scary thought for anyone because, you know, people when they hear about it directed at them, okay, is a very scary thing. Yeah. So if it were directed at me, first of all, you have to understand that the cancer, the diagnosis oftentimes is made on a test like prostate-specific antigen that really has no bearing on whether it's real or not. So if I were ever diagnosed with that, I would say, doctor, thank you for your medical opinion, but I'm going to go find out the truth. Okay, so first of all, is it really prostate cancer? Because that is really it's a big question because it's not been answered. You know, so do I have inflammatory markers that look like that? Is the PSA out of whack? Are there other things that look like this? I will not rush to a biopsy because when you think about it, the biopsy goes through the anus, through to the prostate, and the chance of getting infection as a result of just doing that test is a very real possibility. You know, so there are other scans like thermal scans and things like that where you can get a thermal scan and see if the heat produced there is indicative of disease or something like that. So, and I have these 7 things which I advise people all the time. People call me up and say, I've just been diagnosed with this kind of cancer, what should I do? And I will go through these 7, and it goes through something like this, that first of all, stop all sugar and starch carbohydrates. I say if it's a carbohydrate, if it's white, it ain't right. So the net of it is, okay, first stop that, because stop feeding the problem and whacking your immunity like we've talked about. So it's a double-edged sword. It's a terrible thing. So get your vegetables and eat tons of them. Vegetables, primarily, fruits not so much, but vegetables, eat a lot of fibrous vegetables. So if you're going to get a carbohydrate, it should come from a fibrous vegetable. Okay, and then follow the 4 corners of superfood nutrition I talked about. Get all the nutrients that your body needs and get the 4 corners: low calorie, nutrient dense, high, broad spectrum antioxidant, taking in all 5 classes of antioxidants, as I talked about, reducing the sugar and the glycemic response, and then increasing the healthy fats, the fish oil fats. Now, again, I go to antioxidant fish oil. You have a lot of people out there touting shellfish oils like krill oil or green lipid mussel oil, that sort of thing. I mean, it's still omega-3, and so it does have omega-3 benefit. But the touting of that instead of fish oil is not appropriate according to the literature, the way I have reviewed it. And so, yes, you can get benefit from those things, but they talk about that these krill oil has a lot of astaxanthin in it, therefore it can keep it from spoiling, some of the things we talked about in keeping the oils from spoiling. But when I looked at how much astaxanthin was actually in a krill pill, it was so minute, it was unbelievable. So you want to try to get 1 milligram of astaxanthin in addition to all the tocotrienols and so on to get the fish oils, because it's really important. We talked about all these things I've talked about already are reducing inflammation and reducing glycation and oxidation and angiogenesis. So I personally would go on a fuel fast. I would have living fuel for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for until I decided what path I was going to take to deal with this diagnosis of whether it was real or not. And then things like resveratrol. It's a very powerful antioxidant, but that's one of the ones that you ought to be taking. And then curcumin. Curcumin has been shown to be so anti-cancer. There's a lot of research on that now. And recently a doctor sent me a photo, which I showed you, about this squamous cell carcinoma on the lip of this patient. It was just terrible. And he put this paste with curcumin and coconut oil, and in 2 weeks it was gone. And I don't know what the biopsies look like in that, but the point is just this, is that nutrition is powerful. It's extraordinarily powerful. And if you start pointing in the right direction and doing some of the things that the research suggests, it has to be good for you. Another thing that's critically important is vitamin D levels. I would say, I would make sure that mine already are, but if I was in that particular situation, I would make sure that my vitamin D, 25 hydroxy vitamin D level, was in the 70 to 90 range in a test. And so that's one of the first tests I would get. I would get, you know, all the tests, including the inflammatory markers and so on, but I would get a vitamin D3 test or vitamin D, 25 hydroxy vitamin D test to see where it is, because vitamin D is the immune modulator of the body. So having your vitamin D levels at the right level is imperative in this particular case. And then another thing I would do is I would take significant amounts of vitamin A, because it's also an immune enhancer. And then there's some well-known mushroom extracts that enhance immunity too. Now I'm saying this is not a treatment protocol I'm giving anybody. What I'm saying, this is what I tell people: do these things while you're figuring out what it is that you're going to do. Because see, this business called medicine, or business called cancer care, it does a lot of fear to patients. You have this problem, we need to deal with it now. But the truth is that it most likely is not that level of emergency. Now, it can be, but most likely you have some time to get a second opinion, to get your bearings, get your brain working, and go to somebody like Ralph Moss or somebody else and buy a report, because he has a great report, which I always send people to get this report. It tells you what are the types of care used for that particular kind of cancer out there, and what are the success rates of the various ones, and who are the practitioners that are doing it, and what are the alternatives. That kind of information is incredibly powerful, because it's put in a way that you can literally hand that to the doctor, and it's scientific documentation. They have to go, well, yeah, I guess that does make sense. And if your doctor refuses to work with you or tells you that you should not take antioxidants during cancer care, you might want to consider a different doctor, because the literature is not backing that up.
Could you please share with us your own breast cancer conqueror story?
Well, fast forward, I'd been in practice 24 years, and typical morning, rushing to the office, jump in the shower, and I felt a lump on my left breast. And I knew innately at that point it wasn't fibrocystic, it was an unhealthy lump. So I had it diagnosed with unconventional methods, and it was, diagnosed as breast cancer. I had seen in my practice that patients who chose traditional methods of cut, poison, burn didn't fare well at all. I mean, they suffered so much from the side effects of those treatments, and many of them died as a result of the treatments, not so much the cancer. And on the flip side, I saw patients who were using gentler methods of healing, following the anti-cancer protocols that I was recommending, and they were getting amazing results. So there was no doubt in my mind what I was going to do and which path I was going to follow. So my protocol consisted of specific homeopathic remedies, herbal tinctures to weaken the cancer, to boost the immune system, proteolytic enzymes, some dietary changes, some detoxification, colonics, those sorts of things. And I also used a paste or a salve on my breast to help the body expel the tumor. In the paste, there's an herb called bloodroot, and bloodroot has an alkaloid or a plant compound called sanguinarine, and that particular compound goes after cancer cells and kills cancer cells without touching healthy tissue or healthy cells. So you can actually take bloodroot internally, or you can apply it superficially to very superficial tumors like skin cancers and breast cancers and that sort of thing. So my journey lasted from 2004 through 2006, and I've been happy and healthy ever since. But as I was going through that journey, there was one thing that was gnawing in my gut. It was, why would somebody like me develop breast cancer? I had done everything right. I was under chiropractic care. I was eating organic before organic was in style. I had home births, breastfed all my children. I massaged, I exercised, I ate well. I thought I was doing everything right. But as I started studying more and researching more, I realized that there were some components that I was missing. And that's what led me to create what I call the 7 essentials, or 7 basic steps that if people follow, they never have to fear cancer again.
Tell us a little bit about the 7 essentials then.
Okay, 7 essentials,
Yeah.
7 basic steps. You know, one of the things that, one of the complaints that I hear from people is that they're confused, they're frustrated, and they're overwhelmed because they don't know where to start. You know, who do they believe and what do they believe on the internet, because there's so much information. And I can relate to that because I had some of that overwhelmed feeling at times. So I created 7 basic steps. Now, essential number 1 is let food be your medicine. Hippocrates, you know, founder of modern medicine, he looked at food as a prescription for our health, and that's what we should do as well. Essential number 2 is to reduce your toxic exposure. We live in an extremely toxic world from a macro to a micro level, and so it's very important to learn to, you know, reduce that as much as you can. Essential number 3 is to balance your energy. We are electrical beings and we run on energy. So it's very important to balance that energy through chiropractic care, through acupuncture, massage, exercise, proper sleep. All these things keep your body in balance. Number 4 is to look at the emotional wounds, heal the emotional wounds. And this is something that a lot of people kind of like to skim over. You know, they don't want to think about the hurts and the childhood wounds. But unless you heal those past relationships, you learn to love yourself, you connect with your Creator, you're not going to truly heal the body, because this healing is not just physical, but it's also emotional and spiritual as well. Essential number 5 is to embrace biological dentistry. Look at what's in your mouth, because we know that the metals in your mouth, the root canals, can affect your body from a chemical point of view by the toxins that they're giving off, but also from an energetic point of view. If there's a root canal or a heavy metal in a tooth that corresponds to a specific organ, that in time is going to weaken that organ because of the acupuncture meridian system is being compromised there. So biological dentistry, extremely important for true health. And then number 6 is to repair your body with therapeutic plants. There are literally thousands of published studies, as you know, that prove the power of natural medicine. I mean, there's everything from every herb, every type of food that has shown the benefits of boosting the immune system and weakening the cancer and preventing cancer. So learning about those plants and those supplements are extremely important for a healing journey. And lastly, number 7 is early detection through thermography and through specific blood work. Now, thermography is a technology that reads the infrared heat that's coming off the body, so it can detect physiological changes happening at a very early stage. We can't say that it diagnoses cancer, but it can detect some changes on a cellular level. By the time a person finds a lump or bump in cancer, that tumor has been there 5 to 8 years. It takes that long for cancer to develop and show up. And then there's also specific blood work that most people don't know about. Traditional medicine doesn't use them, doesn't recommend them, but there are ways to measure hormone production and enzyme production of cancer cells at a very early stage, again, years before they develop and years before they're seen on a regular blood test. So those are it, 7 essentials, 1 through 7. Follow those things and you never have to fear cancer again, or any type of disease for that matter.
So AJ, let me ask you a question. If you were personally diagnosed with, say, prostate cancer, like your grandfather had, what would be the steps that you would take to treat it?
You know, I've been asked that question many times. You know who William Donald Kelly is. I am a tremendous believer in what he has done, not only because of what I've read in his book, but I've probably over the years met close to 100 survivors. I'm talking about not 3-year survivors, 5-year. I'm talking about 10, 15, 20 plus year survivors. One of my closest friends, Dr. John L. Tate, up in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He's a 40 plus year cancer survivor from prostate cancer. I've met women with breast cancer. I actually met somebody, a 15 plus year survivor of pancreatic cancer.
15 years.
Yeah. And to me, anecdotals, if that's all you got, if all you've got is, well, Johnny was sick, Johnny showed up, Johnny got these pills, now Johnny's better, that's what I talk about an anecdotal. But when you got the medical records, you got the pictures of the tumors, you got, you know, the befores and afters and spades. As a doctor told me one time, Mr. Lanigan, you can't argue with results. You don't have to explain it. I see the pictures. And I'm inclined not to believe one doctor who told me one time, well, you know, cancer sometimes cures itself. There's a reason. And after 15, 16, 17 years in enhancing the immune system using beta-glucan, I've seen tumors disappear. I've seen doctors in amazement. How, are these the right records? Is this my patient? I mean, because this can't be, because we haven't treated you yet with chemo and radiation. Your cancer can't be getting better. Your cancer can't be gone. People who have embraced certain diets, coffee enema is one of my favorites. As Dr. Tate used to always tell me, man, that coffee's good, but you're putting it in the wrong end. I actually tried a few coffee enemas. I'll be honest with you, I'd probably enjoy being in a fist fight. But if I had cancer, I'd figure out a way.
If you could, tell us a little bit about your personal experience. You mentioned prostate cancer. What did you do to treat your own cancer?
So I had been vigilant about prostate cancer because my dad had prostate cancer, and I saw what he went through. So he had the prostatectomy, and I saw the results of that. So I started started being vigilant about my PSA, as most men should, you know, around about, we're probably in my 40s, mid-40s. And so I would go every year and have a digital rectal exam, again, as all men should, and a PSA. At around age 49, I think, I saw my PSA go from 1 point something up to 3 point something, right, which was a fairly dramatic increase, and you know, got my attention. So I didn't do anything initially, but then when I went the next year, they had gone up to 4, and 4 is kind of the cutoff point in conventional medicine for when you need to do something. So it's kind of what I now call the boiling point. So in medicine, we treat boiling points, right? So I'll give you this little analogy that if you were to take a pot of cold water and put it on the stove and then stick your hand in it and then turn the heat on high, at some point you would take your hand out of that water because it's getting so hot, right? And that may be 130 degrees, maybe 140 degrees, depending on your pain tolerance. Once you take your hand out of the water and it stays on there, once it gets to 212 degrees, right, if we're talking about solute-free water at sea level, then at 212 degrees it's going to boil, right? Now, if you stick your hand in that water at 212 degrees, right, you're going to get burnt, right? If you stick your hand in there at 211 degrees, it's going to burn. 210 or 200. So it's not a good idea to wait till the boiling point, right, to make that an actionable time for you to intervene. But that's what we do in conventional medicine, right? So that water's getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter here, and your A1C gets up to 5.7 or 6 or whatever the number is, and that's the boiling point. Now all of a sudden you had diabetes, right? Let's say your hemoglobin A1C at 6. Well, what were you at 5.9, right? You weren't boiling, but you were still hot enough that you're getting burnt, right? Same thing with high blood pressure. So with the PSA, the boiling point is 4, right? So that's when they say you need to get a biopsy or whatever. Well, what was it at 3.9, right? We should be looking or investigating why PSAs are elevating when they get anything above 2. Right, so above 2, you've either got some type of infection or you have, or you got cancer, right? If you hadn't had trauma or some of these other things. So when I got up to 4, I approached actually one of my instructors here. I've lived here in Amarillo. I went to medical school here, finished up medical school here in Amarillo, so I know, many of the doctors, and many of them had been my teachers in medical school. And Mike Wilkerson is a local urologist that I had studied under, really good guy. So I went to him. And I was only 50 years old and very good looking. so it's hard to believe, looking at me, that I've got cancer. So he didn't believe that I had cancer and told me most likely this was an infection, let's take some antibiotics and then we'll check it again. And so, I went with his recommendation and we did that, and the number went up. And so I said, Mike, I think it's time for us to do a biopsy, and he agreed. And there was cancer, and there was not just cancer. I mean, it was widespread cancer, as you'll see on the documentation. So, so I had taken care of my mother. She had been diagnosed with colon cancer back in 2000, and we did the natural immune boosting therapies on her. They had given her 6 months to live, and she lived for 6 years. And so I started doing the same thing with myself. At this time, I was headed on my way actually up to be with Dr. Jonathan Wright, to work with him in the clinic up there in Renton, Washington. And so he and I put our heads together, were able to put our heads together and to start to do some things in order to boost up the immune system, 2, maybe to kill off some of the cells, because there will be some cells that refuse to change. And so we started doing those things, and made the numbers come down. One of the things that we did out there, I was able to do it out there because of the laws out there. Medical marijuana is legal, so we did the medical marijuana. We did high-dose vitamin D. We did this immune therapy called the universal oral vaccine. Of course, the diet was very important, so the juicing and away from any kind of grains, sugars, and that type of things. And and I had symptoms that let me know that my cancer had progressed. So I saw those symptoms reverse, but it really had gotten up to a point where I had said my goodbyes to everybody, and let people know that this is what. We're in a kind of a no-win situation here, but then things turned around, and long story short, I went and had a repeat PET scan here back in, I guess, November, that we'll be able to get a shot of also, that again showed no cancer. So, and I've done this with person after person after person, if they are willing to do what it takes to to get off this toxic diet, right? That's usually kind of the stumbling block for a lot of people, and they're just so addicted to this, the sugar and the wheat and so forth, they just can't get off of it. But when people do, we certainly do see, again, a reversal of this pleomorphism, and cancer's not there anymore. I mean, the cells are still there, but they have just chosen that they don't need to be cancer cells anymore.
One of my first patients is a wonderful lady. She lives in New Jersey. She came to me, I'll never forget, December 3rd, 1987. She's so memorable, I remember the day. I'd only been in practice a couple months. She had stage 4 breast cancer, very interesting story. In 1985, she develops a mass in her right breast. Breast turns red. The doctor thinks it's mastitis, which is an infected breast, puts her in antibiotics. Doesn't get better. Gives her more antibiotics. Doesn't get better. The breast gets bigger, redder, looks nasty, so he sends her to a surgeon, biopsies it, comes back inflammatory breast cancer. As physicians know, inflammatory breast cancer is the most aggressive type of breast cancer there is. It's virtually incurable by standard approaches. It was huge at that point, so big that when she was sent to the surgeon for surgery, he said, it's too big, I can't operate on you. What you need to do is have radiation first to shrink it down. She goes through 5 weeks of radiation. The tumor shrinks down enough so the surgeon said, I'll try to take it out. Takes it out. It was 8 centimeters, which for a breast cancer after radiation is huge. But more importantly, 17 of 17 lymph nodes were involved with cancer. All the lymph nodes that were evaluated had cancer, which is a dire prognosis. The way it works in cancer medicine, whenever you have more than 9 lymph nodes involved, it's a death sentence. They did a bone scan, but they didn't see anything in the bone. But when you have 17 out of 17 lymph nodes positive, you're dealing with deadly disease. Her oncologist decides that they're going to give her aggressive chemotherapy, a triple agent regimen, very aggressive. In those days, it was the standard for metastatic disease, CMF, Cytoxan, methotrexate, 5-fluorouracil. Those are the three drugs that he was developed in Italy. They tell her that this won't cure her, but it might prolong her life, so she starts doing it. 2 years into it, August 1987, she develops pain in the sternum. They do a bone scan. She's got multiple lesions in her ribs consistent with metastatic disease, a huge tumor in her sternum. They do an x-ray, confirms the tumor. The guy, the oncologist, honest guy, throws his hands in the air and says, nothing else we can do. Now, I'd only been in practice 2 months. It's not like I had this kind of international reputation. I was like, you know, as well known as dog poop. No one knew who I was. I happened to be on the Bob Atkins show. Bob Atkins is an old friend from my journalism days. I'd included him in a couple of my articles. So we remained personal friends. He had a very well listened to national radio show back in those days. And he knew about my Kelly study. I'd given him a copy, which I couldn't get published. And he had me on a show. And this patient's social worker that she was consulting with because of the stress of cancer happened to have an interest in alternative medicine. She actually, ironically, she worked for the American Cancer Society. She kept her interest in alternative medicine secret. It's like pornography. You have to keep it secret, you know. You'd have to hide it because they might do something. She might lose her job, end up in jail. So she had a secret interest in alternative medicine, heard me on the show, and she tells the patient, you got to see Gonzalez. Even though I'd only been in practice 2 months, there was something in the radio show, and Bob gave me like an hour, that resonated with a social worker. And the patient believed what the social worker said, came to see me. And it's interesting, 1987, been in practice 2 months. Why would anyone trust me when we're dealing with stage 4 cancer? But she did. And we've learned often the difference between success and failure is the attitude of the patient. You know, we treat people biochemically. Yeah, my goal in life, once I adopted science as my new lifestyle, was to spend my life at Sloan Kettering doing basic science research. I never even thought I'd see patients. But I've learned I had to change that. I learned a lot of this from Kelly, that the attitude and the mind of the patient is the single most important determinants. Patients that are at peace with their situation, have faith in the practitioner, always do the best. I always tell patients, if you don't trust your practitioner, whether it's me, Joe Schmo down the street, Sloan Kettering, leave. Find someone you believe in, because your lack of belief or lack of faith or lack of trust will undermine your treatment, whatever it is, chemo, radiation, wound. She trusted me from the beginning, did the program. I don't know why she did, but there was something that resonated. We got along great. Did the program. Didn't want scans, said, what's the point? They told me I'm going to be dead, so why do scans? Why expose myself to the radiation? Even back in the 1980s, she was thinking like that. Finally, 2001, 14 years later, I said, look, I'm trained as an academician. Humor me. Do a bone scan. We won't do CAT scans. Okay, I don't want you getting the radiation. Let me do a bone scan. She did. All the tumors were gone. And she's alive and well now. It's, 26 and a half years since her diagnosis with stage 4 metastatic inflammatory breast cancer, developing metastases while on aggressive chemotherapy with total regression of disease on my treatment, 26 and a half years out. I'm trained as kind of having been a journalist, so funny, it's like I have a different personality now. I'm obsessed with the conventional medical literature. Friday evenings I'm reading medical literature, and I study the literature because it helps me in my own work. I know of no case in history of medicine of a 26 and a half year survivor of metastatic inflammatory breast cancer into the bone, developing metastases while on chemo, who had total regression on a nutritional program. I don't know of any other case.
What was the name of your 2010 book that you finally, I guess, got published?
One Man Alone, an investigation of nutrition, cancer, and William Donald Kelly. And in there we have the 50 case reports. Now initially, the patients actually gave us permission not only to use their medical records, but to use their name. But with the internet, we don't want these people, and a lot of them are still alive. They're still in, the 80s, some of them in the 90s. So we don't want them being harassed and reporters tracking them down. So we blanked out their names with one exception. Arlene, I can use her name because she's a good friend. In fact, she called today, so I got to give her a call. Arlene Van Straat, she was one of Kelly's great patients. I now follow her. 1982, Appleton, Wisconsin, typical American success story. She and her husband ran a gas station 7 days a week, worked their tail feathers off, added a store to it. They were later bought out by a big chain and became, they were able to put let's put it this way, put their kids, their grandkids through college. She starts getting gallbladder pain, and her doctor said, you got gallbladder problem. This is 1982, before they routinely do CAT scans. They take her to surgery, take out a gallbladder, open her up. She's got a tumor in the pancreas, tumor in the liver. They biopsy the liver lesion. It's adenocarcinoma, metastatic pancreatic. Close her up, meets with an oncologist, said chemo was going to do nothing. This is 1982. Still does nothing today, in 2014. Goes to the Mayo Clinic, and I have the note from the Mayo Clinic guy. He said, I'm not going to give you chemo, just ruin your quality of life, enjoy your life. Well, she went to the best of the best. They said they can't do anything. Learns about Kelly from his 32-page book, One Answer to Cancer, 1969, on a local health food store. Reads it, calls Kelly. Kelly says, well, I've trained this chiropractor locally. He trained some people who does it really well. He's near your town. Why don't you go see him? She does. Under Kelly's direction, goes on the program. Well, she never went back to another doctor. Never had a scan done. Well, the fact is, here it is, 2014. She's alive and well. Interestingly enough, paradoxically, ironically, today she called, so she wants to chat. Usually it's about her family. She's 32 years out. August it'll be 32 years. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, biopsy-proven liver metastases, confirmed at the Mayo Clinic. To put it in perspective and to give Kelly his credit, I know, and I searched the literature religiously, I know of no patient in the history of medicine with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, adenocarcinoma, the worst kind, biopsy-proven liver metastases, confirmed at the Mayo Clinic, not some local hospital in Guatemala, but by the Mayo Clinic, who's alive 32 years later. I've never found a case like that. I've challenged doctors at conferences when I lectured to match it, and they've been unable to do it.
32
years. August 1982, she was diagnosed stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Pancreatic cancer.
Alive 32 years later. Now, I technically cannot say the tumors went away because she's refused to do scans for 32 years.
But she's alive.
She's alive, yeah. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything else. The average survival for stage 4 cancer, pancreatic cancer, in those days and today is like 3 to 4 or 5 months. Nobody lives beyond about 18 months with that kind of disease. Once it's in the liver.
And this is 32 years.
32 years later. Now, if she'd been a conventional patient, treated at a conventional institution, the American Cancer Society would have held a press conference. It would have been on the cover of Time magazine.
Oh, yeah.
All the news stories. I remember about 10 years ago that there was one of these new chemo drugs that was being touted, and the group at Harvard were pushing it. They ended up on Good Morning America and ABC, CBS, the little morning shows. One patient who had a regression of disease at 6 months, and she got on all, the patient was being like a show horse, being shown around on all the TV shows. Well, that drug was later taken off the market because it did absolutely nothing. But that didn't stop the Harvard team from, they have a good publicity machine, and they're Harvard Medical School. So if they have a chihuahua that lives 2 months longer, they get on national TV. We have a patient with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and I challenge anyone who watches this to match the case. Critics can criticize. Criticism is easy. Any critic out there, match the case. I'll be impressed.
32 years.
Yeah.
So Dr. Isaacs, in, I guess, September this last year, we both had the privilege of speaking at a conference in Atlanta, and I was able to speak to a patient of yours that is a pancreatic cancer survivor of 13 years.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about her? I'll mention her name, Sarah Cooper, and talk about the treatment protocol that you've used with Sarah to be out 13 years with pancreatic cancer, which is supposed to be a death sentence.
Right. Well, she was originally diagnosed in the fall of 2000. She had been having some digestive issues, and then she started losing a lot of weight, and she wasn't trying to lose weight. So she lost the weight, she was having these digestive issues, and she went to see her primary care physician, whom I have to give a lot of credit to for instantly doing a CAT scan. She was found to have a mass in the pancreas. So a few months later, it took a little time. I think people were telling her she should get surgery, and that's what they were advocating, but she wasn't too keen on that idea. So eventually she did, though, get a needle biopsy, which showed that she had a poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma, which is another way of saying it was really bad news. And there are different types of pancreatic cancer, so just to be absolutely sure, the hospital sent the slides on to an expert at the Mayo Clinic who also looked at them and said, yes, this is pancreatic cancer. It's the adenocarcinoma, the nasty kind. So they once again suggested that she really should have surgery. But she had done her research. She's a very smart woman, and she had checked into how well surgery works for pancreatic cancer. Now, surgery can be curative, but even when they think they can cure it, in other words, when they do all the scans and there's no evidence of spread in terms of CAT scans and the like, and they go in and they do the surgery, it's a big procedure. Some people die from the procedure itself, and only 25% of the people that have that operation are in fact cured by it. The other 75% wind up having a recurrence. So Sarah's gut feeling was this is not a good idea. She didn't want to have the surgery. So she wound up going on her program off the protocol, so to speak. And what she was advised to do then, the nuts and bolts of the program for her, large doses of pancreatic enzymes, some other supplements that are designed to help support the body as she fought against the cancer, and a diet, in her case, that was predominantly vegetarian, although it does include eggs and fish, some dairy products, and the coffee enemas, other detoxification routines. So that's the program that she was on, which she's implemented over the last 13 years now.
Quite an impressive lady too, by the way.
Yeah, she really is.
Webster, let me ask you a question. Let's say you went to the doctor and he diagnosed you with pancreatic cancer.
Okay.
What would you do personally?
Well, the first thing I would think about was, yes, now I can experiment on myself. I would probably experiment on myself, and if it didn't work, then I would use something that's proven to work. I would not, I have absolutely no fear of cancer, and I doubt you have a fear of cancer either.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm so encouraged from this show tonight. I'm so encouraged every time I hear about somebody that's alive today because of using a natural cancer treatment. Well, I mean, heck, I'm encouraged anytime anybody's alive that has been diagnosed with cancer, even if it's from the conventional treatments. I got nothing against them. But doing what I do, I advocate natural cancer treatments. And it seems that everywhere I go, everywhere I speak, I'm getting constantly bombarded by people that are sending me emails or coming to shake my hand, letting me know that thank you for the information that you've shared. I'm alive today because of some of that information that I used, that I implemented into my treatment protocol. And although I was given a death sentence, I'm alive today. I mean, if there's nothing that'll bring a tear to my eye quicker than to be introduced to somebody that's alive today because of implementing some of these treatments that we've been sharing with you. And it really reaffirms to me that cancer does not have to be a death sentence. There always is hope. And as long as you have this information that we're sharing, as long as you're being empowered with this information, you can make an informed decision and you can treat your cancer the way that you decide to. So I want you to keep that in mind tonight. Go to bed, get some rest. This has been an encouraging show. Tomorrow's going to be even more encouraging. We're going to hear from more cancer survivors and thrivers that are alive today to tell their story, that have been given that gift of life. And so I know you're going to be encouraged. I thank you for joining us tonight, and I look forward to tomorrow night. Help support our mission, join the movement, and save lives. When you choose to own the 11-part docuseries, The Quest for the Cures Continues today, you'll help us to achieve our goal to eradicate cancer once and for all. And a portion of the proceeds from each and every sale goes to one of 3 cancer charities that are actually researching real, effective, non-toxic treatments for cancer. Plus, you'll receive a second digital set absolutely free that you can share with your friends and your family. Be a hero and choose to support our mission today. You'll be glad you did.
I hope that one message that's coming through loud and clear throughout The Quest for the Cures Continues is that freedom does matter. Not only our freedom to choose treatments for cancer, but also our free access to nutritional supplements. One person who's fighting for our freedom to choose worldwide is Dr. Rob Verkerk, who's the founder and director for the Alliance for Natural Health International. I'm here with Rob Verkerk with the Alliance for Natural Health International. Rob, thank you for being with us tonight.
Hey, fantastic to be with you too.
And what I want to do is get you, first of all, to tell our listeners exactly who you are and what you're doing with the A&H. And then I got a couple other questions for you. So first of all, just kind of give us a background on you.
A&H is all about working very hard to protect sovereignty over our bodies in order to be able to manage our health, have freedom of choice, ensure that there is informed choice to make those choices, and allow people to manage their health in the way that we have already been doing for many hundreds of thousands of years. And of course, modern science comes along now, and coupled with what we already know from traditional systems, most of the solutions to most of the big diseases that are out there that are creating a huge burden on healthcare systems around the world, the information is available, but it's not getting to people. And there's a whole regulatory movement that is being developed by very large corporations in cahoots with governments that is increasingly impinging our ability to choose products that can really transform lives, transform the quality of lives, and eliminate the burden of disease that is really crippling society today.
So you mentioned regulatory agencies. Now here in the United States we think of the FDA, but you're working with A&H International. Is the FDA the only regulatory agency that we need to worry about?
Not at all. The FDA exists in different forms in all other countries. In some cases you have authorities that, like the FDA, that deal both with food and with drugs. In other parts of the world you've got specific food authorities and other drug authorities that are somewhat separated. The difficulty when you have the same people dealing both with food and drugs or sharing offices within similar buildings is that they inevitably develop a system of regulation that works for the corporations that supply the largest amount of money to those governments. And these people are bureaucrats, so they're not necessarily looking at the big picture. They're certainly not looking at how they can resolve the disease burden in any particular country or part of the world. And the system, the intricate system that is being developed by these authorities working globally, groups of bureaucrats working globally, is already being mapped out. So if we look, say, at the development over the last 40 years of the Codex Alimentarius, this is how corporations and governments have come together in order to manage the global food trade. So the increasing availability of processed foods, of preserved foods, of foods that have been irradiated or that have relatively high levels of pesticide residues, all of that is being agreed at an international level through Codex, and it is being 100% supported by the FDA and also by the European Commission, that interestingly stands as a body that represents the trading bloc of the 28 member states that comprises Europe, which actually supports now a population of close to 500 million people. And again, in this system at Codex, there is a consensus approach to decision making. And there are a number of countries, such as the USA, Canada, Europe, and Australia, and even New Zealand, that play a dominant role. If a smaller country, say a sub-Saharan African nation, disagrees with any of these issues, they tend to be quashed. And as a result, you get a system of trade that is meant to be all about free trade, but it's actually expanding trade in products that, particularly food products, that are right at the nub of the key health problems that we have. So we look at the prevalence of American-style foods that are maybe typified by, say, McDonald's or other processed foods, or the products of Pepsi, for example, or Coca-Cola, of which there are many associated products, or products from Nestle that cover many, many different brands. These are the companies that play the dominant role so that their products can be available in more or less the same form in supermarkets all over the world. When it comes to healthcare products that we choose to use, such as vitamins and herbs, Codex is now directing its attention to these kinds of products. Initially, it's been dealing with vitamins. It's also dealing centrally with the issue of claims. And claims is a very important area because it's what you can say about the benefit of a product. And essentially, since 1997, it's been developing a system of guidelines about how you should look at the science that describes the benefits of a product. And this system has now been put into effect through a sophisticated regulatory regime in Europe. And what it's done is it's initially banned thousands, actually around 2,000 health claims that were commonly used for a very wide range of vitamins, amino acids, products that are essential to life. I gave an example yesterday that if you look even at the 9 essential amino acids for which are essential in the diet, not a single approved health claim is allowed. Look at something as important as coenzyme Q10 or resveratrol. Health claims have not been allowed for those. So the implications is that future generations, if they are never able to receive positive information about these nutrients, they will slowly believe that they are harmful. And if you look at that coupled to very proactive media campaigns that the pharmaceutical industry is engaged in that deliberately work to disincentivize people from buying these products, you have a recipe for disaster. So we are working specifically using what we call the tools of good science and good law, because we believe that both science and law can be very much part of the solution, although they've been distorted in order to create the regime that currently is prevalent most societies today. And by using good science and using good law, targeted legal challenges, for example, we're able to make very strategic changes to the system, coupling that with advocacy so that you can use what is left of crumbling democratic systems, and also using, most importantly, grassroots support by educating people about the benefits of these sorts of products and also the importance of them becoming politically active so that we can all work together to make change. That's how we can hopefully work together to bring things back on track.
Well, Rob, thank you for your time today. What you're doing is invaluable. The efforts that you're making and the impact that you're making on the world to educate and to keep us free, and that's what we're all about. And so I really appreciate your input today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you.